This is a screen capture video, Unit 6.1, that involves plant tissues. One of the first plants that I look at in this unit, in the outline, would be the Douglas fir. It's a tall tree, one of the tallest trees in the world. They grow out west. Don't grow so well here in the Midwest, but out in the western states. They grow very tall and oftentimes harvested for telephone poles and uses where they need a long log that's fairly straight and relatively strong. Sometimes they are harvested for their wood to make wood flooring and use in woodworking. The sequoia, I understand, doesn't grow quite as tall as some of the Douglas firs, but has more mass to it. And I've got a couple of pictures of sequoias. There's a trail that goes through this sequoia, and you can see the man that's in the tunnel that's been cut through the sequoia out in northern California, perhaps. And then here's another sequoia with a cabin, a log cabin next to it. And the diameter of the base of the giant sequoia trees, these giant redwoods, can be over 30 feet. And the small cabin could fit in the footprint of the base of one of these trees. I have a picture, I have seen pictures where there is a one-lane road, at least one lane wide, maybe a little bit wider, going through the base of a sequoia. But this one I readily found on the internet, and so I copied it and put it in here. A tree that's of great prominence here in the Midwest is a black walnut, and I don't show the tree. You can look that up online yourself. But the wood of the walnut, the black walnut, it has a beautiful texture to it, the coloration, the texture, and it's an expensive wood. Some of the walnut trees can be worth thousands of dollars. Depending on the market, some of them have gone for over $10,000. It just depends on how they've grown, how large they are, what kind of scars they have, any limbs. Those all affect the wood quality. This is a hardwood. It would make good flooring. It would be a very expensive flooring, but some people use it for decorative walls also. But that grows throughout the Midwest. It's very common in our area, in the Casey College District area. Plants can be grouped into two main groups, the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. The gymnosperms, that term means naked seed. And if you look at the two parts, gymno and sperm, the gymno, some people might wonder, how is that connected to nakedness? If you go back to Greek times, when they did their Olympic Games, their sporting events, oftentimes they were done in the nude. And so that does fit with the naked part. And the sperm has to do with seed. As a matter of fact, in ancient writings, especially writings of the Old Testament, where they talk about the offspring of people, such as the offspring of Abraham, sometimes referred to as the seed of Abraham, and sometimes seed is referred to as seed. So that's where that comes from, and the connection you can see there. Angiosperms are where the seed is in a fruit. When you think of gymnosperms, think of coniferous trees such as pine trees, spruce trees, and cycads. The cycads look a little bit like the coconut trees. The angiosperms, these are most of the plants that we would think about aside from coniferous trees. So most of the grasses, the broadleaves, the trees that we have in our area outside of coniferous trees would be angiosperms. Angiosperms are further divided into two main groups, the monocots and the dicots. And this page 623 would be from a Pearson text of Biology by Campbell et al. But you can look this up. I found this online, and I thought I had an image for this. I'll see if I can get that. The monocots, monocot stands for one cotyledon. Dicots, two cotyledons. It's the way the seed is formed and how the seed will germinate when it starts to grow and becomes active from its dormant stage. The veins of a monocot tend to be parallel. You see that in the grasses. The venation of the dicots tends to have a net appearance. It's net-like. It spreads out in different directions. The vascular bundles and the stems of monocots tend to be complexly arranged. They're complex in their arrangement and not a distinct pattern to them as you would see in the dicots. In the dicots, the vascular bundles appear in a ring, kind of out towards the periphery of the stem. So if you were to cut a cross-section, especially if you were to stain these, you can see the vascular bundles in a microscope. They show up fairly well. The root structure is different between monocots and dicots. In the monocots, the root structure is fibrous, and there's not a taproot. Whereas in the dicots, it's not so fibrous. There's some shoots off of the main taproot, but there's a main long taproot. This taproot can go down many feet. In alfalfa, it can go down 15 feet or more, and it helps the plants to reach water supplies that other plants wouldn't be able to reach. So oftentimes when you pull a dicot, you end up breaking off the taproot. The floral parts of monocots usually occur in multiples of 3, so 3, 6, 9, so on. The floral parts of dicots tend to occur in multiples of 4 or 5, such as 4, 8, or 5, 10. I've already mentioned monocots with their fibrous root system. This is one of the reasons why grasses are planted in yards, and especially in waterways, because they help to prevent erosion. The fibrous root system helps to hold the soil. If you've ever pulled weeds from a garden, the grasses tend to pull up clumps of dirt that stick to the root system, or the roots stick to the dirt, and so you have to shake off that dirt to help kill the grass type of plant that you're trying to get rid of in the garden. These are a list of things that I've already mentioned that you can read on your own. When you think about plant structure, you can divide it generally in what's above the ground and what's below the ground. What's above the ground is generally considered the shoot system. The shoot system has two main functions, photosynthesis and reproduction. And with the photosynthesis, there will be cells that contain chloroplasts, that contain chlorophyll, which undergo or carry out photosynthesis, and they transform light energy into chemical energy. Also reproduction, you can see the flowering part of the plant. With the flowering part of the plant, we generally think about sexual reproduction. It is possible that plants can be reproduced asexually by breaking off stems, breaking off leaves, and planting those. Sometimes that's all you need to do. Sometimes you need to put a rooting compound on the leaf or the stem. That'll help it to take root and grow. We'll talk a little bit about those later on. The root system generally is what you think of below ground. Not always, but generally. And the root system purpose is to help anchor the plant and to store food and absorb water. Those are the three main functions. This keeps the plant from moving away if it wants to stay where there are good nutrients and water. And food, which the plant actually makes, is moved into the root system by a type of tissue called phloem, we'll talk about later. Because in photosynthesis, the light energy is converted into chemical energy, and that chemical energy would be sugars, or types of sugars. And those are stored in the root system oftentimes, especially in perennials where the leaves are dropped in the winter. You don't want the carbohydrates that's been produced or have been produced in photosynthesis dropping to the soil, being wasted. You want to keep those and store those where they're safe. Then they can be pulled up in the spring and help with the sprouts that are coming up from the buds. The root system is very important in absorbing water because of tonicity, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on perhaps. But because of sugars that are stored in the roots, it causes water to want to move into the roots, and that there's a pressure that builds up and that pushes up the plant. If there's a lack of water in the soil, pressure doesn't build up and the leaves actually droop because they lack pressure. It's called turgor pressure. Sometimes the main taproot's called a primary root, and then the roots coming off of it are called secondary roots. And the very end of the taproot or primary root has a protective cap called a root cap, and that's where it's pushing through the soil and it's rubbed off instead of the cells that are reproducing. In this next image, I have an image of a root hair, and the root hair is actually an extension of a cell, an epidermal cell, the cell of the epidermis or the dermis. The main purpose, with two main purposes of the root hair, are to absorb water and anchor the plant. Even though these are microscopic, you don't see them individually with the unaided eye. They're very small. When you have many of them, they're very important in increasing the surface area of the cell instead of the cell just being cut off and being straight. You have this greater surface area over which materials can be absorbed, including water. And also, collectively, many of these small root hairs help to anchor the plant. It's also important to keep in mind when you transplant a plant, oftentimes these root hairs are damaged. And the more of them and the more they are damaged, the more leakage of water from the plant. Hence, when you transplant a plant, you're often told to water it well to replace the water that the cells are losing. It sets the plant back just a little bit. There are modified roots. Since we're talking about the root system, some modified roots are those that have large tap roots. Turnips have been selected for large taproot, carrots have been selected, and sweet potatoes have been selected. The larger taproot has more carbohydrate in it, more nutrients, and greater food value. And so we see these that have been selected. I don't have sugar beets up here, but that's another example of one that has been selected over the years for producing more sugar and having a large taproot. Modified stems. There are different types of modified stems. One type is what are called stolons or runners. You see these on strawberries. And strawberry plants will send out these runners across the ground, and at the end of them there will be some leaves and stems, and if those get covered with dirt, at least the stolon gets covered with dirt, especially at the base, you'll send down roots and you'll have a new plant growing, and you can actually cut the stolon or the runner, and then you can move the new plant. That's a type of, that allows for a type of asexual reproduction. Tubers, the spud, which people buy at the store, we call them potatoes, those are actually a modified stem according to botanists. They're not a root. And the plant stores a lot of starch in the potato tubers, and that's what we tend to use for food. Starchy foods tend to be cheaper, and potatoes tend to be cheaper than a lot of foods. And that's one of the reasons why we use them in our experiments in Biology 101, and your potato lab is based on the potato because it's cheap, easy to come by. If we were to cut the potatoes, slice very thin, and stain it with iodine, stick it under the microscope, you could see the starch grains, many of them in the potato. It's rich in that carbohydrate. Here's an example of a rhizome that I'm circling. That's a modified stem. The tuber is a modified stem. The tendril is a modified leaf. The runner or stolon is a modified stem. If you were to, I haven't gotten to the tendrils yet, but if you were to video these plants growing and time-lapse and speed up the film, you could actually see these tendrils swirling until they come in contact with something and wrapping around it. In the next video, I'll start out with talking about modified leaves and discuss those a little bit as I continue on.